Say good morning, but it's only morning for me usually. Welcome to Office Hours. Today we are joined by the wonderful Carla. And Carla, do you want to introduce yourself, tell people a little bit about what it is that you do at Raza, and maybe if you've worked on any chatbots that you like a lot and want to talk about, maybe talk about this. So yeah, kick it off.
Okay. Well, hi everyone. I'm Carla. I'm a back-end engineer at Raza. I'm actually joined the company fairly recently, in October last year, and have done a little bit of work on a few of the different products, including Raza open source. And I don't come from a chatbot like background. It's my first sort of experience of working for a in this area. So I don't know if I have a favorite one, to be
Okay.
honest. Yeah.
Well, that's perfectly fine. Not everyone does. And we're waiting for chokes for wow, sorry. Well, we're waiting for folks to join, and feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat. Um, I just wanted to say that that's actually pretty common. So, for our developer community, a little heads up on that. We've been running a yearly survey for y'all just to like get an idea of where you're at, what you're doing, what would be helpful in terms of content. Um, and the last one was run last summer. And the majority, I would say, of folks who are building Raza chatbots don't have a background in machine learning or NLP or honestly chatbots at all. Hey, Avina, welcome, welcome. Good to have you. So I would say that that's actually pretty common in our developer community, and I think a lot of experience in software engineering, but maybe a little bit less in chatbots in particular, is a common persona, and I'm sure some of you watching are like, "Oh, that's me." I recognize that. So, yeah, and again, folks, feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to them as they come in. Um, Meanwhile, so you mentioned you'd worked on Raza open source, and I think you mentioning to me that you'd just moved on to a new project. But what's something that you worked on in Raza open source that you're like, people should use this? This is a good feature.
Um, well, I joined just as version 3 was being released.
Mm.
So it was kind of a busy couple of weeks of doing several rounds of QA testing and
Mm.
checking and kind of bug fixing. And the biggest change in version 3 is the graph
Yes.
architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so it's not a sort of super, it's not like a kind of outward facing feature, but
Mm-hmm.
in terms of improving just improving the efficiency and the scalability and the training times. That's a really cool thing. So yeah, like using 3.0 is good if you want to take advantage of those things. And then the other thing I worked a little bit with was an experimental feature about success markers. So sort of an
Mm-hmm.
analytics type tool. It's experimental, so it's sort of really a sort of concept, and that um, that's sort of one of the first things we're doing in terms of adding more analytic and sort of
Mm-hmm.
metrics measurement features that won't actually be in Rasa open source, but will be in Rasa X and in our enterprise software.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the success features, I think it was Vincent Naciel who also had an office hours on those during the launch, I want to say. So if you want to learn a lot more about those, there was that one. And then the graph architecture. Was that one with Yusta? Anyway, we also have a specific office hours just on the graph architecture if y'all want to go back and check those. But yeah, and of course the success markers are in Raza open source. So if you wanted to build, your own analytic framework on top of it, or there were specific like KPIs you were really interested in, do that. Have fun with them. Great. All right, we got some questions coming in. Hi, Victor. Amina says, can I have a story that starts with an action, which is a form, and then there is another action? So my point is, I want, whenever this one entity has been detected, it doesn't matter that it belongs to which intent. I've tried so many ways that it doesn't work. Oh, okay. So I think the flow that you are describing here is you have a story, you're collecting an entity, and you want to do a specific action when that entity is detected. So I think what I'd probably do there is something with a slot. Oh, wow, this one's hard for me to say as well. Slot set event. Ooh, okay, let's see if I can find that in the docs real quick. Hold this up. Set you. Okay, so this is specified their preference for a value of a slot, which you would then fill from your entity. And I think this is when it happens and not how you set the slot yourself manually. Does that sound right, Carla? I'm not sure if you did a lot of digging into slot specifically.
Unfortunately not, but I gather that it's that when yeah, it seems that you can configure slots in a way that when a particular value is read, that then it creates an event of some sort, which I guess would be, maybe what
Amina?
what Amina, thank you,
Yeah.
what Amina has asked.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's an example of whether that's configured in the domain.
Yeah, there's so I think we very briefly mentioned this. Hi, Naveen. Oh, I also see you have more questions. Amina, we'll definitely go through those. I remember it's like influence conversation true, right? Whoop, no, I want to be in this one. Nope. No, sorry. I'm using a browser I don't usually use, and it has remapped my shortcuts, which I'm not a huge fan of. Okay, so it is influence conversations. Yeah. Let's see. So this would be from a slot. And if it's set to true, the assistance behavior will change depending on whether the slot is set or not. So what I might do in your situation, Amina, where you have a form, and it sounds like the moment the slot is set, you immediately want to trigger another action. So I would probably treat that as a form interrupt. I might use a rule there. So when the slot is set, you do something else. And you may want to do a custom action that gets triggered when the slot is set. Yeah, I think it would be helpful if I had a little bit more let's see. Let me read the rest of your questions. I think you might have already answered this. Okay, so I'm going to read the questions again from the top. I'm sorry, this is my first meeting of the day, so I'm a little bit sleepy today. I have a story that starts with an action, which is a form, and then there's another action. I want whenever one entity has been detected, and it doesn't matter which intent it belongs to, and it didn't work. So we can start a story with a slot was set named entity. So I want whenever this entity is being filled, And it doesn't matter what the value is. I had an error where doing this. It says you need to specify a value. Is there a way to deal with this? I'm like 90% sure. Okay. Oh, let's go to the rules. So there's a slight difference between checking that a slot was filled and checking what the
The
slot was
value
filled with.
with, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, we're in the weeds now.
Is there, mm,
Graph components, slot validation, rules. There we go. All right. Slot was set, user provided, name true. Okay, I'm pretty sure that slot was set triggers when a slot is set. And I'm wondering if the problem you're running into, Amina, might be that you're using an entity that you're extracting, but you're not putting it in a slot, perhaps? Yeah, sorry. Carla, what were you going to say?
um, yeah, that's, that's, yeah, I'd like to see how Amina's defined the domain for
Mm-hmm.
that, and whether she set up a rule like this or just sort of what her domain has done, and whether we're correct in sort of thinking that it's because it says that she's got a form,
Mm-hmm.
and
So it might
yeah,
be in a
so
story.
when that
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, just that whether like the form has slots and whether a value gets added to that, and then she wants it to trigger some sort of action, or
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
like it's not completely clear from what she's written. But where's the, yeah, maybe if I go to the chat.
Oh yeah, it's in the YouTube channel.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to start a story by slot with set named entity. Okay, so I am wondering, based on the error where you need to specify a value, I'm wondering if maybe the syntax is slightly incorrect here. So if you just said slot was set, right, you'd have. Ooh. I'm trying to remember what the particular data structure is that underlies this. I don't know that it's a dictionary off the top of my head, but if you just said slot was set and not which slot was set, for here, for example, it's user provided name, that might potentially get you that error. So there could be a syntax problem with the rule. Um, Also, you can have rules and stories in the same YAML file if you would like. It's not necessary. Usually I would separate out rules and stories, but you can't have a rule in a story because sorry, I'm trying to think of like a quick way to describe why that is. It has to do with the internals. Um, but the basic idea is that when deciding what to do next, your chatbot will look at either a story or a rule, and it can't look at both at the same time, if that makes sense. So if a rule triggers, it'll always trigger. Does that make sense? I don't know if this is. I don't know if I'm doing the best job explaining this. So this error could be because you're trying to put a rule in a story. The error could be because of a syntax problem where you're not saying what slot it was. And if you don't care what slot it is, like any slot at all is set, then I probably wouldn't use a form for that because forms are for collecting specific slots, if that makes sense. Um, yeah, it would be helpful if we could get your full code, but I know that's a little bit difficult in the YouTube chat box, not chat bot. Uh, yeah. Did that help, Amina? I'm not entirely sure if we've answered your question or not, but we tried. And just to high level overview of what I would recommend in this case, um, if you want to interrupt a form, I think you can say what the previous intent was. Yeah. So I would say the previous intent is one that is uh, from your form, and then also the slot was set because you can have multiple conditions. Sorry, that's the steps. It should be under the rule. It shouldn't be under steps. Should I have read to the bottom of this page? Maybe. Maybe. Oh, Amina has more information. Fabulous. Two different questions. The first part and the second part. There is a rule to deal with it, and there is a slot. For example, I have an entity payment mode and values credit card cash. Okay, so someone says, I want to pay. And the chatbot's like, how do you want to pay? Cash or card? And the person says, like, I want to pay with cash. And imagine that whatever the value is, therefore there's only one action A to do.
So is it that Amina wants to start a story with a form, the form gets filled, and this is, I imagine, how they want to pay, whether it's, and then whatever value is put there, it then triggers another action. Is that right?
Yes, I think so. And I think the action is dependent on the value of the slot.
That's not what she says.
Is it? Imagine that there's only...
Imagine that whatever value is there, there's only one action to do.
Okay, so it's not dependent on the value of the slot. It's dependent on the slot being filled. Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Reading comprehension. Okay. I don't know that you need to do anything in that case then. Right? So I'm just imagining that I'm doing this. And obviously I don't know all the internals of your bot. I mean, I know you've been working on it for a while, so I'm sure it is much more complex than the sort of fake example I'm coming up with. I want to know how people are going to pay and then maybe like tell them the amount they're going to pay or something. And you wanted to trigger a rule, and the rule, sorry. You wanted to trigger a rule, and the rule was story that starts with an action, which is a form, and then there's another action. So my point is that whenever one entity has been detected, do it so it doesn't. So you have a story with a form, and then you want to do something else. And it doesn't matter what, I mean, it matters, but it's not going to affect what
the action is.
The action is. So the action isn't getting triggered is the issue here, it sounds like. So like the form is being filled out, and then you're trying to get the second action triggered, and it's just not happening.
How do forms and slots relate to each other?
Great question. Fabulous question. So form is a way to collect a lot of information. Slots are the ways that we save that information over the course of the chatbot. So historically, forms were the only way to fill slots at one point. And that is no longer the case. Or at least they were the best way to fill slots.
But it sounds like a form is being used in this example.
Yes.
So essentially when the form is filled, the slot is set.
Yes. So the way forms are basically a way to generate more code so you don't have to write a bunch of stuff. So you'll define the form, you'll be like, hey, I want these 4 slots to be set. And then when you're writing stories, you'll say, trigger that form. The form, if any of those slots have been set, it won't ask for them. It'll only be asked for the ones that haven't been set yet. And it will draw on the utterances you provided to set the slot. And you can say, so slots could be set from entities from anywhere in the conversation, but if you wanted to set it if you wanted to take the information not from an extracted entity, but from the raw text that somebody put in, or the third way, the name of the intent, right? So if you wanted to, if you had an intent, uh, great customer
Pain.
experience, right? Like if somebody said like, "Oh, I had a fabulous idea," or like, "I had a fabulous time here," and you didn't care about like what specifically they said, but just that they had a fabulous time, as opposed to like awful customer experience. "Oh, it stunk. I'd never come here again," and you just wanted the type of thing that they said. That was the third type of thing that you could use slots for, and now they're more flexible as of 3.0. Um, so a form will automatically keep going until it collects all of its slots. Uh,
Yeah. So
yes.
yeah. So what my thinking is that if this form has one slot,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay, there's more information from Romina.
Yeah.
That once it's set,
Mm-hmm.
it should just then do the next thing, which would be the action that's supposed to happen after the form is set.
Mm-hmm.
The slots filled. Hold on, I need to put an intent before the form.
Uh, read it for folks watching. I needed to put an intent before the form so it will work. I needed to associate the intent, the entity, to an intent in order for it to work. So what I want to do is the intent, which is the entity, exists, doesn't matter. I only want to focus on the entity. Okay, so when you had a story that only had a form, the form never launched. Or the form launched, but then the second action didn't happen. I think that. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going back to the fantasy story that we have. So we have a form that we're trying to launch, and then there's a second action after the form. And in order to get that to work, Amina had to put just like an intent in front of the form to launch the form.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense because I don't think that the first item in a story can be provided by the bot, right? Like, how
Mm-hmm.
is it going to?
It has to, yeah.
Yeah. It has to know when to start.
Mm-hmm.
What you could do. So I'm thinking about like silent intents, which is when you just like send a chatbot like slash start form on the behalf of a user, and that's uh, then the chatbot will see that if you provided a story and be like, oh, I've seen this intent, then I should do this. Okay. So I think the underlying issue is that you need a way to tell the chatbot to start the form, and you want to do it when an entity is provided, when a slot is set, but you don't care what the value of the slot is. So I think you want a rule. I think you want a rule. And so the rule would be something like, sorry, I know this has been a very long, winding think through. So I think the rule would be something like, okay, if this particular slot is set, then I want to launch my form. So this would be your form action. Do you need to have a user intent in addition or just the slot? That I don't know off the top of my head. Mm-mm-mm. Yeah, that I don't know off the top of my head, but what you could do is have this intent be a silent intent. So the intent would just be like name greet, but in order to launch the form, you would send on the user's behalf /greet. So the chatbot would see that intent and be like, I know what to do now. But the user wouldn't have to send it. I don't know. This is a little hacky. We're getting into like weird hacks territory. You could also try the conversation start one, right? So if this is the very first thing that somebody wants to do with a chatbot, then it's in here somewhere. Am I making that up? Yeah. So if it's the very first thing that somebody's going to be doing with a chatbot, you can use conversation start, but I think you might still need to send an intent. Yeah. Oh, and Greg says, thank you, Greg. Y'all who don't know Greg, he is a Raza contributor and worked for us, and if I don't know. I'm just trying to say nice things about Greg. Greg is great. You don't have to have an intent to start a rule. Thank you. So you do not need an intent to start a rule. So yeah, that should work. So either the conversation start if you want it to happen right at the beginning, or the slot was set. And this should trigger whenever the slot is set, when the chatbot's trying to decide what to do next, but it won't happen in a form because it won't happen in a form because under the hood, both the next step to do in a form and the rules are run by the same policy, and steps in a form will take precedence unless you interrupt the form using an interrupt. And I'm pretty sure we have a conversational AI with Raza episode thing, like a video about it. Sorry, I'm having a hard time with English today. So if you needed to interrupt the form, then you would want to provide another rule that says, hey, when this form is happening, if this slot is set, then do the other action. I'm just randomly highlighting stuff. I don't know that that's helpful. Whew. Okay, more clarification from Amina. We're really in the thick of it now. I needed to put an intent before the form so it will work. I needed to associate the entity and intent for it in order for it to work. So what I want to do is that the intent in which the entity exists doesn't matter. I only want to focus on the entity. Oh wait, sorry, you already wrote all that. So with a rule, I need to specify the value of the entity, right? I can't only say slot was set and entity name. You do not need to specify the value. So the form will trigger when the slot is set, right? It's looking for that slot set event that we looked at earlier. It's waiting for that. It's not looking at the content of the slot. So it'll just be like slot was set true or slot was set false. So it's like, have I seen that event? If I see it, I go ahead. And then if I see that it's, null now, so maybe you reset it using a custom action during form validation or something, then that would trigger slot was set false. The value doesn't matter. That I know is a little bit unintuitive. I think we've gotten to the bottom of the question. I think that's the answer. I hope. Let us know if it wasn't. Yeah. Ooh, that was a journey. All right. So if there's other questions or clarifications, please hop in the chat. Meanwhile, my mind is a blank. Give me just a second. I had something I wanted to ask you, Carla, and I am just forgetting it right now. Oh, right. So you mentioned that, you're coming from, a back-end engineering background. You haven't worked in chatbots before. What did you find the most surprising about making chatbots when you started to learn about it and started to build tooling? What were you like, oh, that seems weird. I wouldn't have guessed that.
I think, I don't know. I think sort of my experience of chatbots has been where the kind of the interaction you have with them as a user, everything's very deterministic. And so, the notion of having a chatbot sort of, use AI and sort of learn how to respond to different sorts of unexpected, maybe questions from a user, that wasn't surprising. I mean, it was kind of one of the reasons I was really interested in working at Raza. It's because it's a very interesting area. I'm quite fascinated by just what computers beginning to sort of develop this intelligence, or at least these capacities that we sort of anthropomorphize in a way that makes them seem intelligent. I do think that language is I think it's a very I feel like that maybe chatbots aren't not as sophisticated as we would like them to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Yeah. But none of that's surprising necessarily. Yeah. I guess I'm sort of surprised at how quickly these kinds of tools, especially chat tools, have sort of become prevalent in the internet, and just how, they're like, they're so commonplace now that they're kind of part of the language of how we communicate with, the various services that we interact with online. And yeah, actually, this was it last night, this morning, I was using a chatbot for a company, and oh, that's right, it was Tidal.
Mm.
So I sort of read an article about alternatives to Spotify, and for a while I felt like maybe I shouldn't use Spotify. They don't pay artists enough, and yada yada. So I read this article that and thought, oh, I'll give Tidal a try. And so I kind of went to the website, and maybe a whole other bunch of people had read the same article because it was impossible to connect. And so they have a chat thing, and I opened it, and I was like, I can't connect to your website. Do you have a problem? And their bot just didn't understand what I was trying to ask. And sort of offered solutions that were things like, are you having problems logging in? Or so it's interesting that they're sort of very prevalent, and they're kind of everywhere, but it's also interesting that a lot of the time they're not that good. It's sort of working out, well, this one certainly couldn't work out that, something I thought was kind of simple.
Yeah.
But yeah. So
I know, whenever systems break, especially chatbots, I'm like, how would I fix this? And I think that's a really good, like your specific example, right? Like there's a sudden problem that's come up. A lot of people are asking about it, is a really good, argument in favor of developing a chatbot in a way where you can like very easily, add an intent, add a story, or even a rule for how to handle it, and then retrain and redeploy. Because that's I've also definitely been in situations where I'm in a public facing role, and suddenly there's a major issue and all the questions are about it, and if we just had like a quick way to answer it, and like if we noticed, so like success markers, maybe if you have a lot of conversations where it seems like people are using the same intent over and over, so they're trying to like paraphrase things to see if they can get a different response, I think is a good sort of like warning sign there. And you get like a page and you're like, hey, something's up with the chatbot, and you go to do whatever your internal process is for updating the chatbot. It's interesting. I always think about the gold standard of conversations is conversations you have with people, and that's a very high bar, and we're not there.
And and language just changes so
absolutely
with such frequency as well. But that's the other thing I've kind of noticed, is that I started speaking very basic, like just using keywords when I was speaking to the bot, as though I was searching, as though it was just a sort of search term. And so that's, I think, maybe we're going to end up talking to these things with very simplified language.
Computer-directed speech.
Yeah. I think there's another question.
Yes, absolutely. So Mina wants to know, let's change the subject of rules and forms a little bit. I think we've definitely covered that. We start the talk about data models. What do you suggest for a chatbot, a relational one or a non-relational management system? That is a great question. So I'm guessing this is for the information that the chatbot is interacting with, and not necessarily how the chatbot itself is storing the data. Because I think our tracker stores are... Sorry, that's me thinking. I don't know off the top of my head. I want to say they're more like graphs. Is that right, Carla?
and
Question
just
mark. Yeah. I could go to GitHub, but I'm feeling too lazy to look it up right now. I want to say they're dictionaries, which are non really, I don't know. They're dictionaries. That's a data structure. Um, yeah. So if you're talking about the type of data structure that your chatbot is interacting with, I think it depends on what makes the most sense for your data that you're storing. I will say, in terms of like writing a custom action to run a query, it's probably easier with a relational database than it is a non-relational structure. But um, if it just doesn't work for the data you're trying to store, or like it ends up being enormous, I don't think that's a great choice then. I don't know. I'm sure you have lots of thoughts on this, Carla,
um,
for the knowledge base.
I
Okay.
think, yeah, I think it just depends on how you want to use
Mm.
the. I'm not sure I totally understand the question.
So I'm
Um, like, is this
thinking,
talking about the database and kind of
mhm.
where you store all of the conversations?
So I think it's more the data your chatbot is interacting with, right? So if you have like a customer service chatbot, this would be like the database where you're storing the tickets, or if it's e-commerce, your database where you have
Okay,
your products or your customer information, that sort of thing.
right. Okay. Yeah, I think it just totally depends on what you want to do with the data.
Mm.
Um, can you give us more information about? Oh, it's for your knowledge base. I would imagine a relational database would be fine. Um, yeah. So, but that would probably best be a question directed to your developer team, I guess, or whoever's building the services that need to interact with the data and how they're building them, because there may be very specific query or very specific things they need from the data that with a
Mm.
relational database might require really complicated long-running queries, in which case then a non-relational database would be better. Does that help?
It depends. I know that's a little bit of a frustrating answer. Yeah, sorry. I wish. Yeah, if you have a little bit more information about the type of database, or the type of data you're storing, that might be helpful. Um, Generally, like documents with metadata will often be stored in non-relational databases because there might be like a complex branching structure that you just end up with like a lot of empty space with, in a more, you know. Sorry, I'm really struggling with language today. Like a like that shape that I made with my hands. Oh, hi, Ben. Uh, yeah. I may have one sec. I'm gonna just look something up real quick. I may have a resource that might be helpful, just like at a very broad, high level. Um, uh, I wrote a notebook many, many moons ago. I'm gonna see if I can find it. But it may be a little bit of a searching journey. That might be a little bit more helpful. Hmm. I also don't remember what it was called, so that's also helpful. Uh, it might have been called something like reading in data, possibly. It helped. Okay, good, good, good. Uh, no, not that one. Sorry, I'm just scrolling Kaggle right now. If you're wondering what I'm doing in another window, was it the data cleaning challenge? Maybe handling missing values. Missing dates, inconsistent data entry. I don't think so. It is very relevant to what I was trying to just say, and doing a bad, doing a bad job. Uh, with, I don't think it was the dashboarding stuff. Amina wants to know, how does
How does cinnamon work?
Thank you, Carla. How do they work? Do you need to add an example with them for every one of them? So if you added a value, adding the part at the end to handle synonyms. No, so that's the value of synonyms is that you don't need to add examples for all of them, and basically it just like maps them to each other. So let me pull that up really quick. Nope, that's not the level of complexity I was looking for right now. Synonyms. Concepts, there we go. Yeah, so basically the thing that this is doing is it's just saying that whenever we see this, we will map it to this, right? And I don't need to provide a bunch of examples for it necessarily. I hope that helps. I don't know. You don't know that I'm doing a good job talking today. Hopefully I am.
I think you're doing great. You're doing
thank
great.
You, Carla. I appreciate that. Just a little forewarning for y'all. I am not going to be doing videos for a couple of weeks starting soon because I'm going to be moving cross country and I am full on busy brain right now. So yeah, so basically the way they work is they're just like mapped in a rule-based way. All right. DW wants to know how to code question and answer. So who is person 1 maps answer person 1, who is person 2 maps answer person 3, and every other person maps to answer 3. Okay, so that third one is going to be the tricky one there, right? So in general, I think that this could be handled pretty well by an FAQ. And the basic example of FAQs is that they can interrupt a conversation, and it's a simple 2-term thing. Something is identified as being an FAQ. There's a separate NLU component that's run, so it's a little bit of a hierarchical structure to figure out which FAQ, and then the response is just fixed in a rule-based way, and then you go back to the main flow of the conversation. So it's a way to handle digressions. So who is person 1? I think, should hopefully be pretty stable and able to be answered with, a consistent thing. I'm just thinking about the ways that people would express this and how easy that is going to be to classify. So I think the person 1 and person 2 will be pretty straightforward to do. The person 3, which is any other person, is going to be a little bit more difficult. And I could, imagine, I gave you a task and I was like, I want you to sit here and I want you to let me know if you see a flamingo, let me know if you see an owl, and then let me know if you see any other type of bird. And, flamingo is pretty easy to pick out. You could probably do that pretty quickly. Owl's pretty easy, well, a little bit more difficult to pick out, but every time you saw something else that might be a bird, you'd have to look at it and be like, is it a flamingo? Is it an owl? No, okay, it's a different type of bird. Okay. So it's just like from a machine learning standpoint, that third intent is going to be a little bit rougher to write and have examples in. That said, I think it's doable.
It would need to know that it's a name of a person. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yes, but you don't know what the names are.
Yeah, you don't know what the names are. If it's about kind of, I don't know. You could train it to recognize names, I guess.
Oh.
Yeah, and you'd have to, I don't know if there's a finite number of names, if this is about kind of sort of, a company. Yeah.
Another way that you might handle this, right, is you might have a broad intent that captures all, who is this person? And then you had Um,
Certain rules that if
yes.
it was who is X or who is Y, it would have
Yeah.
custom responses,
Yes. I think custom
actions. Sorry.
responses over rules. So there is a conditional response, is probably what I would do here. And the reason you don't want to do a rule is because, like we were just talking about with Amina, in a rule, you can set whether a slot was set, right? It's looking for that slot was set event. It's not looking at the content of the slot. But there's a sort of I don't know if it's little known or not. So there's this thing called a conditional response variation. And what it means is um, based on the value of the slot, right? So in this case, logged in is a Boolean slot. It can be true or false. Based on the value of the slot, if the condition for the value of that slot is fulfilled, sorry, this is a little bit complex, then it will choose a specific answer. Otherwise, it's going to have a default answer. So I think the thing I said about FAQs you shouldn't do, I think the way that I would actually do this, having thought about it for like 3 more minutes, is I would have an intent that is, and thank you for shaking this loose for me, Carla. I would have an intent that's like asking about somebody with a bunch of examples. I would treat 2 of those as entities and then save them to slots. So specifically your 2 names you care about, everything else I just ignore. A universal name extractor is a very hard thing to build. I would not recommend it, especially if like maybe, one thing depends on it. It's possible. It's just rough. And then I would have 2 conditions, right? One is specific slot person A, 2 is specific slot person B, and then the third one is just the general answer for everything else. And that way, if you wanted to add additional people in the future, then you could just add additional conditions. I think that's going to be the easiest thing. And the really nice thing about conditional responses is that they don't dramatically affect your response time, right? Because it's just picking the responses using a condition, not your response time. It doesn't dramatically affect your training time because it's not, it's not adding a bunch of branching, if that makes sense. That's what I do. Yeah, I hope that helps. I tried to pick up a piece of paper and drink from it.
Nice one. Amina's asked me what are my daily tasks with Raza? Is it on bug fixes or improving features or building new ones? And if it's possible to have an example, do you work with the data science team? How often? So my daily task it depends on it can be bug fixes, it can be improving features, and it can be building new ones. I've just joined a new team that is focused on sort of developing some metrics, analytics style features for our Raza X enterprise product. So there's not much to show yet in terms of stuff that we've built, but you can look at some of the things I've done in Raza open source just by looking at the GitHub commits, I guess. The issues are the issues in GitHub public?
The ones on Raza open source, yes.
For Raza open source, yeah. So, you can search my name there and have a look at some of the issues that I've worked on. And mainly I've done bug fixes while I was working on Raza open source because I joined, as I mentioned at the beginning, just as we were releasing the latest version, 3.0, and there was a lot of QA testing happening and a lot of bug fixes and stuff. And yeah, so the other thing I sort of looked into, I worked on the most was stuff around the domain object. So the way Raza will look at your domain YAML and your data YAML files and sort of, the domain YAML, not the NOU stuff, but and kind of create a domain object from that. And yeah, there's quite a complicated process that's involved. And that I was trying to fix a bug where a customer had multiple domain files, and it wasn't our domain wasn't picking up all the intents that it was supposed to pick up, and so was misconfiguring things. But yeah, that's one thing I worked on.
And I did find the thing I was looking for for a very long time earlier. But yeah, I hope that gives you a little insight into the Raza work, Amina. I don't know. Hopefully, I phrased that well. So the thing that I was looking for earlier, so the name of this is Data Cleaning Challenge .json.text and .xls, which is an Excel file, and this is aimed at data scientists specifically, and it's also not about databases. It's about data that fits in memory. But the general idea that I was trying to convey here is that the difference between raw text data, which is unstructured, right? It's just a text string, hierarchical data that has, some sort of like nesting branching structure, and then tabular data, which is in like a grid. It's like an Excel file, basically. That's what I was looking for, and I found it. And I don't know that it was worth the wait, but I'll pop it in the chat anyway, in case y'all want to see. Vin says, I have an intent which can be further extended with an additional slot date value. What would be a good way to handle the following conversations with the bot? What is the price for item A on date X, given the date X is given incorrectly written by the user and detection through duckling failed? Oh, okay. So I'm guessing that...
What's duckling?
Oh, great question. So duckling is a entity extraction library which uses regular expressions. Sorry, I'm trying to go back to the docs. Is a duckling...
Like, what does it mean by the detection through duckling failed? The date?
Yes, so extracting the date. Yeah, so it's duckling takes in text strings and extracts things like dates or addresses or email addresses, and then returns them in a structured way. So in this way, someone has provided an address that was unextractable by duckling. I mean, the conversational flow that I think I'd want as a user there is I'd want to be asked to clarify the date, because I don't have the chatbot doesn't have the information that it needs. And I'm trying to think
that's what I'd say.
Yeah. How I would implement that. That's why I'm staring off into the distance. I mean, this is probably a place where I'd use a form, right? Because you want to collect 2 slots and you need both, and you want to keep asking until you get both. So I think I would use a form there to just automate it. And because you need 2 pieces of information, and there's no guarantee that both pieces of information will always be provided in the same intent, because often people will default to the shortest possible sentence they can put in a chatbot. The shortest possible input they can put in the chatbot to save time, just based on my experience. Yeah. And I'll pop the link in as well. And then I think there's a broader question there of what to do when your machine learning fails, basically, because that is a thing that happens. Yeah. Let me put the chat in the YouTube chat while I'm thinking about it, so I don't have to do 2 things at once, because I do not have the brain power for that right now. And paste. And there's the link. There you go. Yeah. I mean, that's the trade-off, right? You get the flexibility of people being able to express things the way that they want. You don't have a keyword system where they have to have the keyword typed correctly. But the drawback is that you have that flexibility because you're guessing. And sometimes you're going to guess wrong. And sometimes people will put stuff in a format you don't expect, and that's why you guess wrong. Yeah. And I mean, the Raza answer would be you're using Duckling. So I wouldn't say like try to extend the Duckling library to handle this particular type of mistype. Unless you really want to. I'm pretty sure it's in Haskell, which I don't know, but maybe you do, and you want to make a pull request to extend it. And it's Duckling is also open source. Yeah, I think I'd do this as a forum so that you are asking if you don't get that piece of information. And hopefully that's a helpful answer for you, Vin. Let's actually look at the forum documentation because we've talked about it quite a bit and we haven't actually looked at the documentation for the forums. So y'all can see how they work because they are also pretty different in 3.0. And I don't know that you worked on these, Carla, but they look pretty different. So this is what a form looks like in the domain. Well, I guess you're working on the domain, so you would have seen this. So in this chatbot, we have the cuisine and the number. I'm assuming this is like number of people who want to eat at a restaurant. And then you have slots. So these are pieces of information that are extracted from user-generated text, but you don't do anything with them unless you map them to a slot. Slots are how you save that information. So these also happen to have, names that are similar. So cuisine is a text slot, so the information in it is saved as a text string, and it comes from entity, and the entity that it comes from is cuisine. You could also add additional information here, like say you only wanted it set in a specific type of intent, or you didn't want it set in other intents. Let's say you were asking people both their own ethnicity and what ethnicity foods they most enjoyed. You wouldn't want to conflate I am a person of Chinese descent with I am a person who enjoys Chinese food. So you might say, hey, don't set this slot from the ethnicity question. And also pretty much the same thing from number. And then this form, so when you trigger this form in your actions, or when it is triggered based on a story or a rule, then it will get the slots, cuisine and number of people, by asking for them. And if cuisine has already been filled or number of people has already been filled, it won't ask for it. And if they both already been filled, then the form is going to be like, do I need to do anything? No, and just disappear. So the reason we have forms is that it just saves time, so you're not writing the same type of conversational flow a bunch of times. And that's sort of the general way they work. There's also, you would provide the specific, there's a lot of information on forms, but you'd provide the specific way that you would ask for this also in the domain in your responses. Not responses. Yeah, it's called responses. Yeah, where you would ask specifically how, specify how your chatbot should ask about them. All right. And a question from Vin. Are there any examples of handling toxic language? Ugh, yeah, difficult. So there is, and I'm going to put a big old content warning on top of this. There is some that I had done for live coding with a chatbot that I had. It is in Raza, I think 2.x, so it's from quite a while ago. Yeah, there are lots of approaches. Context is important. I think a good sort of general approach is to, lump examples in together, have an intent, and when that intent is detected, you can be like, I'm trying to remember what Sarah says. I think Sarah says something like, hey, no call to be rude, or something, or like, please don't talk to me like that, or some sort of response. Yeah. But know that you will have false positives in terms of identifying things that are not toxic as toxic. Just like with any intent, right? It'll sometimes be triggered when it doesn't apply. Yeah, it's a hard problem. Also, there's a podcast episode about it. We were just talking about the podcast, Carla. The very first podcast episode we have with Zirk and the second guest, whose name escapes me right now, who are researchers working on toxic language, and something that we talked about in that podcast episode was also the podcast is no longer happening. So this was when we had one. That if people are swearing at your chatbot, probably something's gone wrong with the conversation, right? Like that's the most likely thing. So you could also like use that to to trigger support. But I would also be like, hey, don't be rude to our support people. They're humans, and that's unacceptable. So, very broad strokes answers. I don't know. I hope that was helpful. Anyway, we're right at time, and I know that it's getting pretty late for you, Carla. But do you have any, last words of wisdom or questions, or I don't know, podcasts you want to recommend to the Raza developers?
Um, Not really. I think that the like if there are questions they have, they should, absolutely, head to the forums and sort of ask people and look through the docs and so on. And yeah, come to these sessions. We're always really keen to know how people are using um, things and what kinds of challenges they have. And it's always really good for us to keep sort of improving our documentation and making sure that, people can do what they want to do.
Yeah, definitely. Uh, yeah. Thank you for joining today, everybody. Thank you so much for making time, Carla. We will be back on Friday for my live stream, and it's going to be my last one for a while. And I think I'm going to do it on 5 chatbots not to build. So some counterexamples of things, and I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it personally. So that'll be Friday, and then next Wednesday it's going to be me and Vincent doing office hours, and Vincent's going to take over the office hours for a while, and then you'll get to see Yusta, which is a rare treat. Our head of DevRel will also be doing them for a while, so don't worry, these are still going to be happening. It just won't be me, which is perfectly fine. We've got lots of fantastic people here at Raza. So thank you so much for joining, everybody. Thank you, Carla. If you've got any other questions, I'll put up this one? Yeah, I'll put up the little forum link again. Head to the forum, and we'll talk to you real soon. Hope you're having fun and building cool stuff.